One drop of blood. That was the whole promise, not a vial. Not a needle sunk into the crook of your arm. A single drop pricked from a fingertip dropped into a small black machine on a pharmacy counter. And out of that one drop, the machine would run the entire menu of a modern laboratory. Cheaper, faster, painless. Available in a store near your house. It was a beautiful idea. Millions of people hate needles. Millions more never get tested at all because the whole process is slow, expensive, and inconvenient. So when a young woman in a black turtleneck stood on the stage and said she had built the machine that fixed all of it, the world leaned in. The machine had a name, Edison, after the inventor. The company had a name too, Theranos. And at its peak, this company was worth around $9 billion on paper, without ever having proven that the machine at the center of it actually worked. Here's the part everyone remembers. It didn't work. The drop of blood was too small. The claims were false. Most of the tests weren't even run on Edison. They were run quietly on modified commercial machines bought from other companies. And the founder, Elizabeth Holmes, was eventually convicted of fraud and sent to prison for more than 11 years. So the story writes itself, right? A charismatic founder lied, and the lie fell apart. Except that is the shallow version. That is the version that lets everyone else off the hook. Because a lie this size doesn't survive for a decade inside a real company by accident. Somebody's job was to catch it, a whole board of somebody's, and they didn't. Today we perform the autopsy, and we find that the cause of death was never really the lie. It was the machine built around the lie so that no one could ever stop it. At Corporate Anatomy, we examine every collapse through 4 forces. Market. Was there real demand for what the company sold? Money. Did capital keep it alive or quietly distort it? Management. Did the people in the governance make it or break it? And moment. Did timing, technology, or regulation deliver the decisive shock? Most stories emphasize the wrong one. With Theranos, the crowd points at management and means the founder's character. We point at management too, but we mean something colder and more specific. We mean the governance. Management is decisive here. And not because one person lied. It is decisive because the company was engineered so that no one could stop her. Start with the thing almost everyone gets wrong about failures. They assume that if a company blew up this spectacularly, the underlying idea must have been fake. With Theranos, the underlying idea was not fake at all. The market was real. That is what makes this case so dangerous. Think about the last time you had blood drawn. You made an appointment, you drove somewhere clinical. Someone tied a band around your arm, hunted for a vein, and filled several tubes with several teaspoons of your blood. Then you waited, sometimes days, for results you couldn't easily read. And you paid a price you never saw coming until the bill arrived. Now imagine erasing all of that. A drop from a finger, a machine in the corner drugstore you already visit. Results fast, results cheap, results before you leave the parking lot. That is not a scam pitch. That is a genuinely enormous market. Diagnostic testing in the United States is a business measured in the tens of billions of dollars a year, and it sits, historically, in the hands of a small number of large laboratory companies. So the demand was there, the pain was there. Whole categories of people avoid testing precisely because it is slow, expensive, or frightening. People afraid of needles, people without easy access to a lab, people who simply never get around to it. A device that met them at the pharmacy cheaply would have been a real public good. This is exactly why the pitch worked on so many smart people. When the market is obviously real, skepticism gets lazy. Investors, partners, journalists, even doctors looked at the size of the prize and let it stand in for proof of the product. The reasoning goes, the world clearly needs this. Therefore, someone this confident, this driven, this celebrated must have cracked it. But needing something and having built it are two completely different facts. Demand does not manufacture a working machine. Wanting painless blood tests does not make the physics of a single drop cooperate. And here the physics did not cooperate. A fingertip drop is tiny. It can be contaminated by the squeeze that produces it. Diluted enough to run many tests, and you can wreck the accuracy of every one of them. Legitimate scientists had circled this problem for years. It is genuinely hard. So mark the first force clearly. The market was not the problem. If anything, the market was the trap. A real, hungry, obvious market that made a beautiful promise sound not just possible, but overdue. The demand was never in doubt. What was in doubt from the very beginning was whether the little black box could keep the promise the market so badly wanted to believe. Hold that box in your mind. We're going to open it. If the market was the trap, money was the fuel that let the trap burn for a decade. Theranos raised a lot of it. Over its lifetime, the company took in something on the order of $700 million or more from investors. And at its high point, around 2014, those investments implied a valuation near $9 billion. $9 billion. For a company whose central product had never been independently validated in public. Now, normally, money is supposed to be skeptical. That is its entire job. When someone hands over capital, they are supposed to interrogate what they are buying. In life sciences and diagnostics, there is a whole ritual for this. You bring in scientific reviewers. You demand peer-reviewed data. You send the device to independent labs. You ask bluntly to see it run. Watch what happened instead. A striking number of Theranos' biggest backers were not diagnostic specialists. They were prominent families, media figures, private investors, people with enormous wealth and, in many cases, very little expertise in laboratory medicine. The company also kept tight control over its own data, citing trade secrets, which meant outsiders were often asked to trust rather than verify. And the technical due diligence that should have stopped everything, send it to an independent lab, run the tests, compare the numbers, frequently didn't happen the way it should have. Why not? Because the money wasn't only buying equity. It was buying proximity to a story, a young founder compared to the tech titans, a board full of famous names, a device that promised to democratize health. When a deal glows like that, the fear of missing out does quiet, corrosive work. Nobody wants to be the skeptic who passed on the next great thing over something as unglamorous as demanding to see the raw data. And the money did something more subtle than just fund payroll. It manufactured credibility. Each new investment, each rising valuation became evidence to the next party in line. Walgreens looked at the money and the board and saw legitimacy and struck a deal to put wellness centers inside its stores. Safeway signed on too. Partners looked at investors. Investors looked at partners. And everyone looked at that $9 billion number as if it were a fact about the technology rather than a fact about belief. That is the quiet violence of money in this story. It didn't just inflate a valuation. It laundered a promise into a fact. Every dollar raised made the next dollar easier and made the questions that should have been asked feel almost rude. The capital didn't verify the black box. It gilded it, wheeled it into a national drugstore chain, and dared anyone to say it might be empty. So the second ruling, money did not kill Theranos. Money enabled Theranos. It supplied the runway, and worse, it supplied the credibility, the borrowed legitimacy that let a company skip the one test that mattered. But notice, capital is only reckless when nothing forces it to be careful. So where were the people whose actual job was to force the care? That's the next room. That is where the body is. Here's the decisive force, and I want to be precise because it is easy to say the wrong true thing. The wrong true thing is Theranos failed because Elizabeth Holmes lied. That's true. She was convicted of fraud by a jury. Her deputy, Ramesh Balwani, known as Sonny, the company's president, was separately convicted too. These are real people and real verdicts on the public record. But if you stop at the lie, you have described the symptom and missed the disease. Because ask yourself the real question, not why did one person lie? Companies contain ambitious people who exaggerate. The real question is, why did nobody stop her? A functioning company is a nervous system of people whose job is to catch exactly this. Scientists who test claims, auditors who check numbers, a board that can fire a founder who has lost the plot. Theranos had none of those working, not because they didn't exist on the org chart, but because each one had been deliberately disconnected. Start at the top, with control. Holmes held a special class of super voting shares. By some reported accounts, her stock carried control amounting to well above 99% of the company's voting power. Sit with that number. It means the board did not oversee Holmes. Holmes oversaw the board. A board's ultimate power, its one real weapon, is the ability to remove the chief executive. That weapon had been taken out of the room. The people nominally in charge of accountability could not enforce a single thing she did not want enforced. Now look at who sat in those seats. It became one of the most famous boards in America. Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, a former Secretary of State, later General James Mattis, statesmen, generals, diplomats, men whose names carried immense weight in foreign policy, in the military, in Washington. And notice what's missing. This is a company whose entire existence depended on one question: does the blood testing chemistry actually work? And the board was thin, strikingly thin, on the people who could answer that. Diagnostics experts, laboratory scientists, clinical specialists. That is the empty chair. Picture the boardroom. Picture the famous faces around the table. And picture the one seat that should have held a person who could look at the data and say, calmly, this does not add up. That chair was empty. The prestige was overwhelming. The relevant expertise was not there in force. And prestige, it turns out, cannot run a blood test. A famous board is wonderful at opening doors, with investors, with partners, with regulators. It is worthless at auditing a machine none of its members are equipped to evaluate. So the two outer controls are gone. The founder cannot be removed. The board cannot judge the science. Now go inside where the people who could judge the science actually worked, and watch how they were neutralized. Theranos ran on secrecy, engineered to industrial strength. Employees were compartmentalized, siloed, kept to their own narrow piece so that almost no one could see the whole picture. The gap between what the machine could do and what the company said it could do, people on the chemistry side and people on the demo side, were kept apart. Aggressive non-disclosure agreements bound staff to silence. There were reports of surveillance, of monitored communications, of a culture where questioning the technology was treated not as diligence but as disloyalty. And the ones who did see clearly and did speak, they were pushed out, threatened with legal action, or driven to leave. The internal scientists who knew the device was failing were the single most dangerous group of people to the story. And the entire culture was tuned to isolate them, discredit them, and make the cost of speaking unbearable. One young whistleblower who tried to raise the alarm was reportedly pressured through intimidating legal channels, and he happened to be the grandson of one of the board's own statesmen. Even proximity to power at the top did not protect a truth-teller at the bottom. Do you see the architecture now? This is not the story of one liar. This is the story of a building designed so the lie could never be caught. Super vote and control removed the board's power to fire. A prestige board removed the expertise to detect. Compartmentalization removed any employee's ability to see the whole. NDAs, surveillance, and fear removed anyone's ability to speak. Every single mechanism a normal company uses to keep its claims tethered to reality had been located and dismantled and captured. That is why management is decisive, not because Holmes lied. A lie is a small thing, easily caught in a healthy company. It is decisive because Theranos was engineered, control by control, silence by silence, to have no one left who could stop her. The fraud was the spark. The governance was the sealed room filled with fuel with every fire alarm cut. Management didn't fail to prevent the disaster. Management was a disaster. Every sealed room has one flaw. It has to open eventually. And the fourth force is the moment it finally did. The moment the governance vacuum met a check it could not silence. For years, the internal alarms had been muffled. The company controlled its own data. It bound its own people. It could out-lawyer a departing scientist and outshine a skeptical investor. But there is one thing a private company cannot fully control: a determined outsider with sources and a printing press. In October 2015, a Wall Street Journal reporter named John Carreyrou published an investigation, and it landed like a hammer. The reporting laid out what the insiders had known and been unable to say safely, that the Edison device did not perform as advertised, and that the overwhelming majority of Theranos' tests were quietly being run not on its miracle machine, but on modified commercial analyzers bought from other manufacturers. The single black box that was supposed to do everything was, for most of the actual work, not being used at all. Understand why this specific event was the turning point. It was not that new facts suddenly came into existence. The facts had existed inside the company for years. What changed is that the facts finally reached someone the company's machinery of silence could not reach. Carreyrou didn't sign the NDA. Carreyrou couldn't be sent to a siloed cubicle. Carreyrou couldn't be outvoted by super voting shares. The one control Theranos never had was control over the free press. And that is precisely where the wall broke. Then the outside checks arrived in sequence, each one an authority the company could not capture. Federal regulators, the agency overseeing clinical labs known as CMS, inspected the actual laboratory and in 2016 imposed serious sanctions, at one point moving to bar Holmes from the industry. The partnerships unwound, the pharmacy wellness center dream collapsed, and then the slowest, heaviest institution of all began to move: the law. Criminal fraud charges, a trial. In January 2022, a jury convicted Holmes on 4 counts. Balwani was convicted in his own trial. Holmes was sentenced to more than 11 years. The company itself had already dissolved in 2018. So the moment was not the cause. That's the crucial distinction. The reporting and the reckoning did not create the failure. They revealed it. The machine had never worked. The reckoning simply switched on the lights. The moment is decisive only in the sense that it is the instant the outside world finally supplied the check the inside world had spent a decade dismantling. When your entire company is built to silence internal alarms, your fate is sealed the day an external one goes off. Let's read the autopsy back, force by force, market, real, and that was the danger. The demand for cheap, painless, accessible blood testing was genuine and enormous. The market didn't lie. It only made the lie easier to believe. Money, it enabled, and it inflated. Over $700 million and a $9 billion valuation, raised largely without the diagnostic due diligence that would have ended it in a week. Capital that bought not proof but credibility. Management, decisive, super voting control the board couldn't override. A prestige board without the expertise to judge the science. Compartmentalization, NDAs, surveillance, and fear that isolated and silenced everyone who knew. Not a founder who lied, a company engineered so no one could stop her. Moment, the exposure. The 2015 investigation and the regulatory and legal reckoning that followed. Not the cause of death, the autopsy itself. The instant an outside check reached what every inside check had been built to suppress. So here's the thesis, cleanly. Theranos is not a story about one fraud. It is a governance autopsy. A company was built so that a single person's control overrode every check, meant to keep its claims tethered to reality. And everyone whose job was to catch the gap had been outvoted, outranked, siloed, or silenced. The lie didn't kill Theranos. The absence of anyone with the power to catch it did, which leaves the uncomfortable lesson. When you next see a dazzling founder, a famous board, and a number too big to argue with, don't ask whether the story is inspiring. Ask a colder question. If this were a lie, who exactly inside this building would be able to stop it? Look for the empty chair. If you can't find the person whose entire job is to open the black box and check, then the black box has already won. One drop of blood was supposed to do everything, and the box that held the promise was never allowed to be opened. The case file closes. The queue does not. Another company is already on the table, built on its own hidden flaw, waiting for the same cold reading. If you want the next case before it goes public, join the free corporate anatomy briefing. The link is in the description.